Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome back to the show. These days, we are often more or less defined by our connectivity. What once unfolded primarily in physical spaces now plays out across digital platforms. And this shift has brought endless opportunities for connection, but it has also introduced new challenges to trust and jealousy. Not only do we compare our individual selves to others, but we also do this with our relationships too. So in this episode, we are speaking to Professor Marco Dehnert, who teaches communication and technology at the University of Arkansas and studies the social impact of communication technologies. Together, we'll explore how social media, dating apps, and convenient digital accessibility can amplify feelings of insecurity and doubt with both ourselves and our partners. But conversely, we'll also examine the potential for technology to strengthen trust. So, hi, Marco. How are you going today? Thank you for joining us on the show.
Hi, Mary. I'm doing super well. How about yourself?
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm doing quite all right too. It's the morning. I'm caffeinated. I'm yep. That's the best that I can give right now.
It is the end of the day over here in Arkansas, so I'm very excited to do this tonight.
Oh, what a nice end to your day. All right. So before we begin, could you tell us a bit about what your communication research entails and what you found so far?
Yes, absolutely. So I study communication and technology. So I'm at the core a communication scientist looking at the ways in which people talk to each other. And more recently, we've seen a lot of talk happening between people and also machines, such as artificial intelligence, chatbots, social robots, other types of artificial entities. And I'm really trying to understand in my research and in my teaching what exactly is going on there, and more specifically, how are we forming relationships with these machines? Can we call these things relationships? How is artificial intelligence and other technology changing the relationships that we also have between people?
Mm-hmm. That is really, really interesting. So what is your stance right now on whether or not we can form relationships with machines?
I oftentimes say that the short answer is yes, we can. These relationships are somewhat different to the relationships that we have between people or with people, but they are certainly rewarding for some people out there. I typically compare relationships that people might have with something like an AI chatbot to something that we oftentimes see with people, which is like a long distance relationship. It works for some people really, really well, but it's just a type of relationship that might not work for many other people just because of certain factors around that relationship. So I definitely say, yes, we can form relationships with these machines, but what we don't know right now is the long-term effects of these relationships for people, what types of people those relationships benefit, and exactly what drives people to these relationships beyond maybe overcoming loneliness that they're feeling right now, or trying to find someone to talk to in this very disconnected and very connected world at the same time that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, and it's quite. I think it's pretty similar. Well, actually, no, I don't think it's pretty similar. I take that back. But I think there's some kind of connection to be drawn here between a relationship to a machine and also a relationship to our our mobile devices and the people that we see on like through our mobile devices, but we will discuss that in greater detail further on in the interview. But before we get that far ahead, we would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Marco? And the first question I have for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
This might be some basic answers ever since we had COVID happen a few years ago, but I really enjoy cooking and I really enjoy hiking. I'm an outdoors person. I enjoy climbing mountains and stuff like that. So I really enjoy the mix of those types of things.
And do you have like a favorite type of landscape or scenery to that you lean into?
I used to live in Arizona for a few years, which is where the Grand Canyon is, and a bunch of other desert landscape, which is something I had never experienced before. I'm from Germany originally, so it was really new for me to explore those types of canyons and desert spaces, and that was really something I enjoyed a lot. Um, Climbing down these like mile deep canyons and going on hikes where you don't see anybody for many kilometers because it's just so remote, and that was really something I enjoyed a lot doing in Arizona.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, what would you say is a misconception that most people have about the desert?
It's very much alive. Oftentimes we picture a remote, dead landscape, right? And especially in the desert areas of Arizona, which is not like a sandy desert, more like a rocky desert type of place with lots of cacti and different types of plant life and animal life. There's so much going on. When you backpack out there and you sleep in a tent by yourself or with a couple friends, you hear so much at night, which can be somewhat unsettling, but it can also be very fun because there's just so much life around you. And that is really something I was not prepared for when I came to the desert for the first time.
That is so interesting. I've never visited a desert myself, so that's definitely on the bucket list for me. I just have no idea where to even begin. I always lived in the city, so like desert is just very foreign to me. But what would you say is a most interesting highlight of desert life for you? Desert life is is kind of extreme to put it, but
No, well, it is desert life. I mean, when I lived in Arizona, I was very much living right in the middle of the desert, which makes you question why they would even build a city there, with like I think 3 million people. So desert life can be very variable. Lots of different weather changes that can really lead to some highlights, and you actually need to watch out for flash floods and other things that you don't drown in a canyon because it might rain 10, 15, 20 miles away, but then a half an hour to an hour later, it might get to you, even though it didn't rain where you are. So it always comes down to being prepared. Bring enough water, make sure you know what the weather is like, and bring enough food and know where you're going, first and foremost.
interesting. And so, when you go out into the desert, do you ever plan to do certain activities, or do you just plan to go with the flow, see where the desert takes you?
It's kind of like a both and. Oftentimes, it's best to prepare at least like a basic route that you're taking so you don't get lost. Or you run out of water, which happens actually to tourists visiting desert spaces. But beyond that, it's really nice to just stand still and observe sometimes. That can be really nice to just be in the moment, like be present, watch what happens around you, listen to what the desert is saying in terms of like the animals and the plants. So I think it's kind of like a both and that's going on.
Yeah, that is so fascinating to me. I've never experienced desert life, and you're making it sound really, really interesting. So for those who are also interested in exploring desert life at some point, what what advice would you give them?
Read up a lot on where you're going. There's many stories of people who go into the Grand Canyon, which is called the Grand Canyon because it's big, and they don't come prepared enough. They walk down there with flip flops or with just half a liter of water. So it's always come down to being prepared. And actually, the best time of day and season to hike is in the morning and in the evening, and not in the summer. Because believe it or not, the desert does get hot. So it's always good to be prepared for that type of weather, right?
Yeah, that's what a shock.
I know.
Uh,
It is to some people.
and is it true that you actually can? Well, I heard this when I was growing up that you can cut open a cactus and drink the water from it.
I've never had that experience in my life. I think it depends on the cactus that you are dealing with. The cacti in the Arizona desert are called saguaro. I don't think you can. At least I haven't tried it yet. And I'm no longer in Arizona, in Arkansas, where there's very much forest, lakes, and rivers. So not a chance to cut open a cactus right now. But maybe in different parts of the world. I'm not too sure. Actually, that's a really good thing to go on a rabbit hole on.
Yeah, well, maybe it's one of those things like similar to, how mushrooms, there's some that are really poisonous and you have to identify the right ones to be able to eat them. Maybe it's like that. I don't know. Hypothesis, none. Complete guessing, plenty. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better, but before we end off the Have You Met section, last thing I want to ask you is, who do you look up to the most in your life, either professionally or personally?
I'm going to say my mom, just because of the way she handles life, I'd say. So yeah, I think I'm going to keep it at that. Looking up to my mom.
Oh, that is really, really sweet. Oh, I love that. That's so heartwarming. Mom, if you're listening, I mean, not mom, not my mom, Marco's mom, if you're listening, isn't that nice? Well, now we'll move on to the interview section. And for starters, how would you define trust and jealousy?
These are really big words when it comes to relationships, right? Like oftentimes we want something like trust and we don't want the other side of that, jealousy. So they're very complicated things. And I think oftentimes people know the feeling, but it might be difficult to put words to that feeling of like, oh, I'm trusting this person or I'm not trusting that person. So I would say trust is something like reliability. Like you can rely that you know someone's person or someone's character, that you know what they're like, and that you can rely on that. I think it's kind of like a reliability issue in that. And I'd say jealousy is kind of the flip side of that. You're doubting that reliability. You can no longer rely on this person, or that you know this person, this character, things like that. So I think it's kind of like being able to understand what that person is like, determining the trust, and then also on the other side, the jealousy side of things might be doubting that you can rely on knowing that person.
Yeah. And do you think it's possible for both of them to coexist at the same time?
Absolutely. Both of these emotions are so complicated and there's so many factors that play into them, right? We have like what's going on within my own head and heart, and then we have what's going on in my partner's head and heart, and then we've got what's going on in the relationship itself between us, and then the entire conversation and context around all of that. Definitely, I'd say that trust and jealousy can exist at the same time. That's what makes them so complicated and complex, but also I think really interesting to understand. There's the saying, right? A little jealousy goes a long way, or like a little jealousy doesn't hurt a relationship. And there's obviously various opinions about what that might look like and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think that kind of speaks to the fact that for many, many people in relationships with all types of people, trust and jealousy can definitely coexist. It just comes down to the balance, right? If jealousy outweighs the trust, then we might be facing a problem in the relationship. But if we completely got rid of jealousy, does that speak to a different problem in the relationship? That might be a different question to ask.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's probably also very much a case by case basis as well. But just really briefly, how would you describe the role of technology in modern relationships?
So I oftentimes say that technology is a tool, right? It does certain things just by itself, and we can use it to do those certain things, and then it's up to us what we do with those things. Are we doing them to hurt a relationship or to benefit a relationship? I'd say that technology really is good at connecting people, but what we've been seeing during COVID as well is that it's also really good at disconnecting people or making us feel disconnected from people, right? So I think technology oftentimes plays into feelings of loneliness, social comparison, like you had mentioned in the intro, and things like that kind of really speaks to the role of technology. It can connect us in many different ways. It can also bring us apart in many different other ways. So it really comes down to how we use the technology in the relationship to ideally support the relationship and not really, subvert the relationship in that way.
Yeah, and the term, or like the saying or phrase, I don't know which way to put it, but people often say that like a healthy use of technology is good. What what would you say is a healthy use, a so-called healthy use of technology? Because for some people, like using technology um, for long hours of the day, because they're able to, maybe, I don't know, examine, or like be able, they're able to kind of like weed out misinformation, or like kind of be a bit more like critically think about what they're consuming. They're able to like cope with the effects of technology a bit better, whereas someone else might use it for a shorter period of time, not be able to like think critically about what they're consuming, and then be more affected by it. So what would you say is a so-called healthy use of technology?
That's a really big question, and I think that's really the question that all of us want an answer to, right? Like, how can I use this tool of technology in a way that benefits me and the people around me, and not the opposite effect? I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what technology are we talking about, right? Are we talking about a phone or a computer, a laptop, an Apple Watch, something like that? I think that's what most of us typically refer to when we speak of technology nowadays, right? But we also shouldn't forget that things like a book were once considered technology, right? So it really comes down to like how we're using technology. Some of us might have to rely on technology for everyday kind of activities, like assistive devices. And for others, it's kind of like a fun activity that we do after work, during work, right? Doom scrolling on TikTok and things like that. So I'd say a healthy use of technology in a relationship is supporting the goal of connection with each other rather than driving us away from each other. It might be a very boring answer, I'd say, a very common answer for someone like me who studies communication between people, where it always comes down to how we communicate and what we communicate about. But that's what I would say, that it comes down to supporting the connection between people rather than driving us away. And what that might look like might be different for any sort of person, depending on what piece of technology they're using, with whom.
hmm And so, from what you know, in relationships, what are some of the common reasons or triggers behind jealousy, especially when it comes to digital products and such?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think it might speak to many of the issues that listeners are experiencing, right, as they're dealing with relationships and technology in that specific way. I think a common one relates to privacy, right? Oftentimes when we go on someone's social media page, let it be Instagram or some other type of profile, you can see kind of like their history, right? And you might be, even if you scroll too far, you might be able to see past partners of theirs or things like this, or other types of comments they may have made there. So I think technology, and especially social media, is kind of collapsing a lot of contexts into each other, where I can no longer just experience you like live right now in the present moment. I can also actually literally scroll back into your past and see who you might have been with before me, who you might have talked to before me. So it's kind of collapsing the past and present into one, and it's also collapsing different contexts of our current environment, right? It's collapsing the personal and the private, the personal and the professional lives. Oftentimes, as many of us are kind of enticed to connect with our bosses or coworkers on social media, and that can kind of collapse the context here, where you can kind of see how people interact with each other in different ways, but that's no longer really possible when you're on social media, because everything's kind of all the same. So I think that collapsing of context is a big one. Privacy, right? It's kind of like a log of what you've done before in specific ways. And then the third really big issue is oftentimes social comparison, right? I can compare myself to all these beautiful Instagram influencers, to all these amazing relationships I see online, and that can really lead to a lot of jealousy as well, right? Oh, my friend X is having this and that type of relationship. They're on that beautiful vacation. Why don't I ever get to do that? Those types of things can happen there as well.
Yeah. And algorithms are a huge point of discussion when it comes to social media, the social media experience. I mean, TikTok's algorithm, for one, is one of the hugest topics in the social media sphere. And it's kind of the reason that doom scrolling is so addictive as well, in that if you are starting to compare yourself socially to an influencer or some relationship, chances are you're going to be sucked into it because the algorithm keeps bringing you back and keeps perpetuating that behavior. So how would you describe that cycle? How would you describe its role in shaping our emotional states?
I think the role is huge, right? Like you say, like the social media experience wouldn't function without the algorithms anymore, right? That's oftentimes what these platforms, let it be Meta with Facebook on Instagram or TikTok on the other hand, really try to keep private and personal protected from the public, their algorithm, because that's where they can make the most money in that sphere. That's where they can control the most users by keeping them engaged, farming engagement, if you will. And like you say, it kind of perpetuates the certain things you want to get out of the algorithm. It can kind of get you into those echo chambers where you see more of the content you're already seeing, and it can limit alternative perspectives on the things that you're experiencing, right? So let's say you're on a specific side of TikTok where you're being presented with one way of doing relationship, and that does not match your current experience of the relationship that you're having, you might be starting to feel increasingly disconnected from this particular idea of a relationship that is being presented to you in the algorithm versus what you have in real life. And then the algorithm can kind of contribute to that even more so and kind of heighten that feeling by just shutting off all types of alternatives. There's been kind of countless studies that look into the emotional manipulation of users through algorithms. And there's oftentimes this fear that, oh, I'm engaging with something briefly and I'm already being manipulated. So what we oftentimes see is relatively small effects, but they do happen still, especially on a large scale. And that can be, problematic for things like relationships or trust building. Obviously, politics is a whole other conversation that we don't need to get into here when it comes to relationships. So there is some influence here by those algorithms, typically in the context of echo chambers, kind of heightening things that you're already seeing in that specific way.
Right, for sure. And how does that persistence of digital information with the algorithm impact trust building and maintenance in a romantic relationship?
Yeah, I think the persistence of that is really difficult to kind of get out of at times, where, once you're in that type of like algorithmic loop or on that kind of algorithmic train down to a certain destination, it might just be difficult to kind of come out of that again if you don't know what's happening to you, right? I think we're starting to see, especially among younger users, consciousness of what they're doing on social media. Like they're coming to an understanding of how these technologies work and what they do to and with them. And they're starting to kind of intentionally go against that, to seek out different types of content or to even form alternative platforms because they're fearing that, corporatization of those platforms. So there are some kind of counter movements dealing with those types of algorithmic effects, kind of going outside of those mainstream social media sites. And obviously you have, again, the political influence coming in here, especially in the United States. There's lots of talk happening right now around TikTok and its algorithm from like a regulative side of like, do we need to regulate or even prohibit that algorithm because of data privacy concerns and other types of issues. So there's lots of conversation around this, especially when it comes to younger users, especially even minors in that specific sphere.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who are experiencing jealousy and issues with trust due to social media, for those who do recognize that, what would you suggest that they do with their technology now?
I would say the first thing is oftentimes coming to the realization that it might be related to the technology that you're using. So that might be a good realization to come through that, oh, I might be experiencing issues of jealousy or the trust I'm having in my partner is going down. Maybe it is because I'm seeing all these supposedly healthy, happy relationships online. So maybe seeking out alternatives, reminding yourself that this is probably coming from that social comparison effect, those echo chamber effects that you're seeing there, that everything online is curated. Yeah, it's not unlike a movie that's specifically cut and framed, and that's what we're seeing on social media. It's more a representation of reality. It is not a reality in that specific case. So coming to that realization that is what's going on is oftentimes a good starting point. And that can then lead you to seek out alternatives. Either it might be something like looking for alternative platforms, alternative online communities, or stepping away from some of the communities that you're currently experiencing or dealing with. Alternatively, it could lead to having a conversation with some friends or your partner themselves and seeing what can you do about that specific feeling that you're having in your relationship.
Yeah. And what are some signs that the use of technology is negatively impacting trust in a relationship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes down to realizing that you might be glued to your phone, kind of like, figuratively, literally speaking here, that you're really spending a lot of time on technology, even when you are with your partner physically. It might be different in long-distance relationships where you have to rely on technology to be with each other, right? But still, it comes down to realizing that you might be spending a lot of time on certain types of platforms, that you might be seeking out platforms to try to see if your partner's hiding something from you, to kind of check on what they're saying, to read their messages, things like this. Something else that comes to mind is surveillance technologies. We all know of AirTags and things like that you can give someone, and it's kind of like a little GPS that you can check with with your app or with your phone. And that can oftentimes seem like it is trust building. Oh, they don't need to text me when they're home. I can see when they're home. But here we might be seeing something of a shift from a trusting relationship to a relationship of surveillance. And then that breaks the question of what would happen if we didn't have those technologies. Would we feel still doubtful about what that person was doing or where they were or who they're hanging out with? So that oftentimes comes to that. That might be a different facet of, those types of feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's really hard for people who are so into the situation to distinguish what they're feeling being a result of technology versus being a legitimate feeling based off of sort like cues or like you know suspicious events, right? So how would you advise them reflecting on it and being able to distinguish the two?
A very good question, right? Because oftentimes, well, I don't want to be saying that, oh, it's just because you're using technology in an unhealthy way that you're having doubts about the relationship, right? That might be a very valid reason that you might be having doubts about what was going on, because maybe your partner's changing, they seem to be hanging out with different people, or there might be other types of rumors that you're hearing. So there are certainly times when there are very valid reasons to be having those doubtful emotions of jealousy or just other types of doubting emotions. I think when you are at that point, it comes down to figuring out where exactly are my doubts coming from, right? Is it because I am seeing themselves? Is it because I'm seeing my partner doing something or hearing about them doing something? Then it might be more related to like an actual issue that might be happening in our relationship itself.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it because I'm doing something myself that then leads me to believe that what is going on in my relationship might not be that healthy?
Mm-hmm.
And that second case might be more a case of maybe being, inspired by social media, to put it like that, to see certain things or to look for certain items that might be causing doubt over the relationship. So asking yourself the question, where might those feelings come from? And that is much easier said than done, because as we said earlier, both trust and jealousy are complex emotions and they can coexist, right, in different ways. And maybe you have a lot of trust in your partner in one part of your life, but maybe the different part, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
So it, I think, requires a lot of emotional reflection and maturing to kind of come to a point of understanding, okay, what exactly is happening here? Why am I feeling this way? Talking to a trusted friend to get kind of like an outside perspective, and then seeing, okay, what exactly is the cause or the reason for these feelings, or might be one of the causes.
Yeah. And conversely, we have been talking a lot about how technology can negatively impact a relationship and bring about all these negative feelings. But can digital communication help to build and maintain trust in a relationship at all?
Well, as someone studying technology and communication, I have to say a big yes, absolutely. I think technology is a great way for us to connect with each other. It's a great way to foster that connection between each other when we're apart. People oftentimes talk about this idea of constant availability, right? And it has obviously both positive and negative aspects to it, but it can have really positive aspects for relationships, right? I don't have to wait, to be very extreme, I don't have to wait for a letter in the mail every 3 weeks to hear from my long distance partner, right? I can literally pick them up and I can see them, I can talk to them through FaceTime and things like that. So it can really facilitate connection across space and time, right? If someone is coming late for work, you can check in with them and you know what they are. So it really does allow you to foster those types of connections. You can have joint social media accounts. You can have like online, shared calendars or relationship apps where you're able to track, I don't know, your savings goal for the next trip in the summer or something like that. So it really allows you to kind of foster your relationship in different aspects and to cultivate, the sense of being together and belongingness across different spheres. And then once you have all these spheres coming together, it's a really nice moment in that relationship. So yeah, to come back to the question, definitely a resounding yes. As someone who studies these types of things, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. Surprisingly, I do love hearing about more positive aspects of the topic than the negative parts, but equally important to talk about. Now, specifically, what digital activities would really help in building trust between couples?
Yeah, like a couple of those I just mentioned briefly, fostering like something like an online digital diary. This could be like a private account or it could be semi-public, or you might choose between what picture or post is public or private. But it could be like a relationship diary, a log of all the amazing experiences that you're having together in a very cost-effective and cool kind of way. Checking in regularly with each other. It might be about an inside joke that you get sent as a meme, right? Or it could be a quick call on the way home. Those types of things can really foster those types of connections, or those types of feelings of being connected and belonging to each other. Having joint online activities, something we haven't talked about so far, is something like gaming. There's many amazing co-op games that you can play with a partner that do require technology, and you can either be sitting next to each other or it can be apart across time and space. But that allows you to also do activities together and kind of solve puzzles or, kill the next big boss or something in a video game. So that can really allow you to do those things together as well.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be like flashy video games. It could be something as nerdy as Scrabble. And, you
Yes.
just, yeah, Scrabble is a great one to do with your partner. And I also, with the online digital account, I actually have a friend, or I know someone who did that with their partner. And basically, what they did was that they documented all of the food that they made for each other. So, more specifically, what are some examples of digital activities that could really help to build and maintain trust within couples?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it could definitely be something very mundane, right? It could be kind of keeping a joint grocery list, a joint calendar that kind of really gets you connected in that specific way. It could be just checking in with each other, a quick text or call on the way home or during lunch break when you're at work, right? Oftentimes people use technology for like inside kind of ongoing couples jokes or something, sending each other like a meme or a GIF or something along those lines. And then obviously something like activities that people can do together. Something we haven't talked about so far is gaming. That can, there's lots of video games out there where people can play either co-op on the couch or across different spaces on the internet, and they can play together, solve puzzles together, strategize about killing the next boss in a video game. So that can definitely play a role in, using technology to foster that connection.
Yeah, for sure. My partner and I used to actually play Scrabble together until he started almost beating me, and then I didn't want to play anymore. That's a me issue. But yeah, but simple games like Scrabble or crosswords and things like that, if you don't have like 2 hours a day to spare for like a more intense video game, those games work just as well and are so fun. I also do use this app called Paired, which is like a relationship app where you get like a question a day, and these are crafted by a range of relationship coaches and therapists. So that's really interesting. Are there any games, apps, and stuff like that that you've you've tried out for yourself?
So this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm really, really bad at remembering those types of names. I always have to have a long list of notes on my phone that kind of has all these things memorized for me, because I cannot for the life of me remember names for apps and things like this. My partner and I, we play a lot of couch co-op games. So this is oftentimes a video game where you sit next to each other, and it could be a very like 15, 20-minute thing where you sit next to each other on the couch and play like on a console and a little video game together.
Like Mario Kart?
Things I've done. Yeah, Mario Kart is a good one. There's also ones where you actually are on the same team. There could be things where you're trying to beat certain levels and bosses together as a team, and you need to support each other along the way. So that could be very, very good for kind of relying on each other, and then also yelling at each other if it doesn't work out, which sometimes does happen.
Yeah, that's reminding me of that cooking game. What's it called?
Yeah, Overcooked is a classic one that
Overcooked.
people use. Yes, there's other types of examples that go into that specific way as well. So there's these types of, I think there's a big industry where people are now realizing that couch co-op, especially for couples, is something that they can really kind of lean into to make them get to know each other under stress, work together, yell at each other, let out some of that frustration from the day. So I think that's really something fun out there.
Yeah, isn't it kind of funny that now we are actually deciding to put ourselves under stress? But it's actually a good strategy if you think about it. Induce stress on your own terms and figure out the solutions on your own terms, where you aren't exactly in a like super dire situation. This situation, just playing games on the couch. There's not much of a real consequence to it, and it gives you the time that you need to think about a solution and how to work together. So it actually it sounds counterintuitive, but it actually is a pretty incredible, like, genius way to figure out each other.
Absolutely. Like you said, Marie, it's like a low stakes environment, right? Like if you mess up, you lose the level, but you don't get lost at night in the woods or something like that. So it's not that big of a deal if you do mess up, but you get to know each other in different ways, and you can figure out who might be the more logical one for puzzles, who might be the more engaged one for certain types of other stress situations in games. So it's a fun and cool way that allows you to get to know each other better and also just have some fun together.
Yeah, I love that. So, lastly, what advice do you have for couples who are struggling with technology, trust, and jealousy?
I think the main piece of advice I can give is asking the question that we typically don't ask ourselves. Why am I using this? What is driving me to use this particular piece of technology? Am I looking for mindless entertainment, like doom scrolling on TikTok? Am I looking for some sort of online community and I'm looking for information? Or am I actually drawn to this because it presents me with a different world that I might not have access to? And really asking ourselves the big, difficult question of why am I drawn to this particular piece of technology? What does it do to me? And if it's not the best thing it can do for me, what would my life look like? What would my life look like if it didn't have the technology in it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So kind of considering the big question of why am I using this technology? What is happening here specifically? I think at the forefront should always be the relationship, and the technology should be there to sustain the relationship or to facilitate the relationship, to allow people to connect with each other. But if the technology itself becomes what we are relating with when we have an actual human partner, it can be a bit difficult in that space. And I say this as someone who studies relationships that people form with only technology, right? There's no other second person involved. But I think that's a different case where we're not committed to a human person and we're slowly drifting away from them by having another piece of technology kind of integrated into that. If I am forming a relationship with another technology, be it like an AI chatbot or something physical like a robot, then that's already a different kind of interaction that I'm forming here, and I'm not doing this at the expense of my actual partner that I've committed to in one way or another.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's been so informative. But now we go into the practices and habits section. So, what is a habit that you recommend practicing to manage the use of technology in a relationship?
Yeah, something I always like to recommend is like a monthly or semi-monthly check-in with your partner. In sound odd to have a check-in with your partner, but what I'm saying is something like a dedicated time where you sit down with your partner. It doesn't have to be all formal, it can be casual, right? But kind of like a dedicated space and time where you sit down and you just check in. It's always good to do that about the relationship in general, but I recommend it specifically about the technology used in the relationship. Hey, what's working for us with the tools that we're using? What is not working for us, and why might that be? Am I having emotions of jealousy when I'm on certain platforms? Am I seeing you do certain things that I don't agree with? It kind of allows you to take a step back and talk about how you talk to each other. It's this form of meta communication that we can take on in those moments where we talk about how we talk with each other and check in about how we feel about the use of technology in the relationship.
Yeah. Now, this might be a very niche, oddly specific question or problem, but I always find that with these check-ins, not that I've had like this specific check-in, but you know how like in relationships you kind of always have like some kind of regular check-in. But I always forget what like any like minor issue because I don't note it down. And then when it comes to the check-in, I just forget it. So what advice do you have for that?
No, that's a really common problem. I mean, like I just mentioned, I always forget the names for the things I use. So it's very common, at least on my part, to forget those things until the check-in, right? It could look like something like just taking notes, or kind of taking a mental note to myself. Okay, this just happened. I saw my partner liking this Instagram post, and I don't like that. Maybe it means just taking a mental note of that, or just bringing it up in the moment itself, right? Just because we have a regular monthly or every other week check-in doesn't mean you have to wait until then. Ideally, you can bring up the issues as they arise. And it's ideally the goal behind those check-ins is to address issues before they become actual issues. That way you don't linger on something, you don't kind of, mull over them for weeks or months at a time until you finally find the courage to bring it up. So the underlying goal of those check-ins is to kind of cultivate a culture of talking to each other in the relationship and being vulnerable. And that's what it takes, vulnerability, to have these types of conversations. It kind of helps you to practice that vulnerability with your partner and to be more comfortable of bringing these things up. So ideally, you might not have to wait until that check-in. You can just bring it up in the moment.
That completely makes sense. I mean, the check-in is meant to be a dedicated space in case there's anything that you do want to bring up, but you don't have to wait until then. I don't know why I just thought that you have to, but then at the same time, I felt I would feel so uncomfortable having to like hold it in for so long and not talk about it until the check-in. That makes complete sense. I don't know if anyone else viewed it that way and questioned why it, but maybe it's just me. But I think if I viewed it that way and I had that issue, someone else out there surely, please, I I really hope someone else out there had the same problem as me.
I don't think it's that uncommon. I think what oftentimes ends up happening is that, we've agreed to this check-in, so I have to wait until the check-in because that's what we agreed upon. It's like this expectation, right? And it takes a certain level of being comfortable and being vulnerable to break out of that routine, because ideally the goal of the routine is to bring you closer together. But if you have to wait until your quote-unquote appointment with your partner to talk about your problems, then that doesn't really seem to be helping that purpose of bringing you both together.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Marco. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Now, I will give you the floor to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Marie. This has been really fun and exciting to talk about. It is going to be somewhat related to the topic, I'd say, because I do study a lot of types of, I'd say, weird relationships, quote unquote, or relationships that might be a bit out there for the people who are listening, in terms of, I feel like I've been seeing this in movies, but this is actually happening in real life. And I'm here to say that, yes, it is happening in real life. So people are forming intimate, romantic, and sometimes sexual relationships with machines, right? It's like talking to a phone, but on the other hand it's not another person. It's just the phone itself oftentimes. an artificial intelligence or AI system. It might be some sort of other type of algorithm, or even like a physical entity, like a robot. And what I'm seeing in the research that I do is that people are forming these types of relationships, and they can be really rewarding for people in terms of offering some sort of guidance through tough times. Having someone to talk to and having someone that actually seems to be listening can be really, really beneficial to people who are struggling with loneliness. It provides a means of connecting. And on the other hand, it also allows for many, many different questions to come up from like ethical standpoints, philosophical standpoints. Well, is love between a human and a machine actually love? That's a very difficult question to answer. And it brings up many legal questions too. Well, what about people who are struggling with mental health? Should they be talking to a machine that's run by a third-party AI developer who's using their data to train the AI system and sell them something afterwards? Should minors be able to talk to these types of machines? There's been lots of rumors over the past few years, and obviously we've been seeing lots of buzz around artificial intelligence all over the world. And that's a big component here too. Not just using things like ChatGPT to get your next class assignment done or to do some brainstorming on a work task, but actually to use these types of technologies for emotional and romantic and sexual purposes. That brings up lots of different issues and questions. And there are many people who are working on these questions, trying to understand the beneficial effects of these technologies for us humans, and also trying to understand the harmful effects and trying to see how can we best use them without putting people in harm's way.
That's really interesting. So, what do you see in the future of this research?
Oftentimes people say, oh yeah, there's more and more technology, or there's more and more AI. We're going to be reaching a time where AI is everything and everywhere all at once, I guess. But there might be a bubble of AI that might be bursting at some point. Oftentimes we've been seeing lots of different ups and downs for technological development, although it might not feel like that because it seems like we've been only going up with the AI development in the last 5 years or so. But there might be a moment of coming down in the future where we might be drifting away, or the technological development might stall. I think it might be something similar to online dating. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when online dating started to become popular, like all these apps like Tinder, Bumble, Grindr, and so on and so forth, people really looked down upon them and said, oh, you met someone on a dating website, a dating app? That can be a real connection. You have to go out to a bar to talk to someone, right? But nowadays, it's the most common thing in the world. And many different people are meeting people on those apps and also forming relationships and even marrying people they found on dating apps. So it's becoming increasingly common in many different ways. And I think that AI as a relational partner, while maybe not coming to a similar level of online dating relationships, might be coming to more acceptance in the coming years or so as more and more people try it out. And while it might not work for many people, it probably will for a few people out there. And they're starting to realize that this might be what they've been looking for in terms of a relationship. So I'd leave it at that. Just saying the final point maybe is that oftentimes when people hear this term of, oh, it's a relationship with an AI chatbot, that's not real, that's not a relationship. How could that ever be similar to a human connection? Well, it doesn't need to be similar to a human connection. It probably shouldn't be. And that's what many people are saying who study these topics, and also many users. They're not comparing these types of relationships to a human connection, a human relationship. It's something else. It's something different that does different things to us. And some people really seek that out, and some people really don't. So I think that's a key point to understand, that just because someone says they have a relationship with their chatbot doesn't mean that it's truly a human-like relationship. It's probably a different kind of relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you made. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Now, if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Yes, so they can go to my Twitter or my LinkedIn. I guess it's called X now, the Twitter space. They can also go to my website, and they can definitely find more information there. I have a lot of research stuff online they can see and try to connect with me on, but Twitter, LinkedIn, and my website are usually the best ways to find me online.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Marie.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.